It's 2 o'clock now. I'm going to give folks another minute or so to log in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So just sit tight for a moment. Alrighty, it is just after 2. Good afternoon, everyone. For folks who have not had the opportunity to meet me yet, my name is Rachel Cermak, and I'm the Broadband Outreach Coordinator here with the Nebraska Public Service Commission. Just a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the broadband.nebraska.gov website. And attendees have been muted and will be muted throughout the presentation, but enter questions into the chat as they come up, and you can do that just by clicking on the chat button at the bottom of your screen. You can also send questions, or if you are not on our distribution list and someone sent this to you, please feel free to email us at connectnebraska@nebraska.gov. So for today's webinar, we're going to review last month's webinar, hit some highlights from that, share what's coming up for future meetings. Colin's going to provide an overview and some updates about the Capital Projects Fund. We'll discuss some upcoming outreach activities, and of course, we'll have time for some Q&A. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to Colin to provide some updates for us and review last month's webinar.
Thanks, Rachel. I'll try to be very brief here. The first thing that we did last month that I think was kind of one of the highlights is we had Ann Byers from the NITC and OCIO's office give kind of an overview of digital equity and what's going on with digital equity, which is a very important piece of the entire kind of NTIA scope of programs that are highlighting broadband in Nebraska and nationwide, really. She defined digital equity as the goal of achieving parity in digital participation in the economy and society. So it's looking at you know, if you have broadband, what are the ways that you can use it, and furthermore, what can people use it for? She talked about digital opportunities. So in other words, broadband availability and ability to use it can help grow the economy, can help improve access to healthcare, increases educational opportunities, and just generally increases improves the lives of Nebraskans. She mentioned some of the upcoming digital equity planning activities. She's talked about the regional planning groups that are meeting, you know, right now, essentially as we speak in areas throughout the state. Talked about weekly webinars that she's putting on. I know there was one this morning on the Affordable Connectivity Program, or ACP, and she continues to put those weekly webinars on. And then some of the stuff that Rachel will be detailing in a few moments here are some of the other activities that are kind of a joint digital equity BEAD activity. So a lot of great digital equity information last month. And then we also went through the 5-year plan, which is kind of the next big report that's due for the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or BEAD, went through a lot of the details on what's going to be included in that 5-year plan, and kind of went through them maybe in painstakingly, if nothing else, but went through them and talked about what we envision as being part of each of those portions of the 5-year plan, and some of the sources for information that we'll be looking for. And again, some of the stuff that's part of the 5-year plan is stuff that Rachel will again be going over. In other words, what are the outreach activities that we have planned as a lead up to BEAD. So with that, I think that's a quick overview. I'll turn it back over to you, Rachel. Not hearing you, Rachel.
User error, always thwarted by that. I was just saying there was a lot of really good information shared in last month's webinar, and if you weren't able to tune in, or if you did tune in and you think there's someone else in your network who would benefit from hearing that information, that was recorded and has been posted on the web. So I would just encourage you to take a watch of that or share that out if you have not yet had the opportunity to see that. So just want to take a quick moment to talk about what some of our upcoming webinar dates will look like. We are deviating slightly from our usual webinar activities April through June. Rather than having our recurring monthly webinar, we will be holding roundtables with specific stakeholder groups. There are many stakeholder groups that we have to and get to connect with through our outreach process, which I'll discuss later. And since we'll be in a very heavy outreach calendar and schedule throughout April and June, we're going to be focusing those activities on those roundtable discussions. Have no fear. We will be resuming with webinars in July with a tentative date for July 7th, tentatively at 10 a.m. We will get that information sent out via the listserv as well, so you can plan to attend that. Our plan at this time is to review a draft of the 5-year action plan during that webinar. And I just also want to highlight that even though we won't be having this recurring webinar through April through June, I promise you'll still hear from us. We'll be using the listserv to share information via email, and I would encourage you to check your spam filters and just make sure to mark me as a safe sender, so you're not losing any information that you would otherwise be receiving from me. So with that, Colin, you are up next again to talk about Capital Projects Fund.
Perfect. Thanks again, Rachel. Just wanted to give people a quick overview of the Capital Projects Fund. Again, this is a grant program that is using a framework of the Broadband Bridge Program. The source of funding in this case comes from the Department of Treasury. And this program, we received applications that were due February 24th, received about 130 applications seeking about 183 million in grant funds. For this program, we have a little over $80 million in grant funds available. So by virtue of it being a competitive grant fund program, we will be evaluating applications and looking to award grants as we work through the process. There's a bullet point there that we have received as part of the process notices of intent to challenge. That's essentially companies that carriers that have either have service in an area where we've received an application or are in the process of building it there. They are required to notify both the commission and the applicant, and if they decide to move ahead with a full challenge, that information is due Friday, April 7th. So we'll be looking for that information to be submitted ahead of April 7th. I did want to mention that you are able to go look both at the applications themselves on our website if you're so inclined. There's a lot of information there, but you can see all the applications submitted and all the supplemental materials that have to be submitted as well, with only a couple of small exceptions to that. But what I really wanted to highlight is that we have our map, we call it the broadband bridge map, but it also has the information for the capital projects fund on it as well. And I'll just display that quickly here, and so that people are aware of what it looks like. And I guess what I'm encouraging you to do is to take a look at that map, especially if there are areas of interest to you in particular, and one, see if there are any grants that have been applied for in your area, and two, if there are and you have any particular feelings about them. We are always accepting public feedback on those projects, so please feel free to send that in if you feel so inclined. On our Public Service Commission website, if you go to under the Telecom and NUSF kind of ribbon in the middle and go to capital, there's a capital projects fund item. Click on that. There should be a link to the map right there that'll take you right to what you're basically what you're seeing on the screen right now. I think it was on the bullet points that the projects have to be contained within one of the 3 congressional districts. So projects have to be either in Congressional District 1, which is kind of the pink color that you see on the screen there, or in Congressional District 3, which is kind of the green color that you see on the screen there. Applications received in District 3 have to be within a town or village. And so those are a little hard to see just from the screen right now. But when you do bring up the screen, when you do bring up the map initially, it will show this table of information at the bottom. If you want to hide that, just click on the little arrow on the top of it and it'll minimize it, and it can be brought back up if you want as well. That's essentially enabling you to look at some of the tabular information behind what's being displayed on the screen. So just a resource for you as you're going through and looking at projects in particular. So as you see on the screen there, it tells you who the applicant is, what the project name is, how many locations are proposed to be addressed through that project, and then how much the applicant is requesting in grant funds. So again, you can see I'm going to minimize that table really quick. You can see the applications and some of the areas on the screen right now. I'm going to make sure everything else is turned off just so it's not confusing. But you can use the wheel on your mouse to zoom in and out to certain projects. When you start zooming in, you'll see some of these that are really within cities and villages in the 3rd Congressional District. And if you click on them, it'll provide a little pop-up window as well that gives you who the applicant is, what the project name is, locations, and again, amount that's being requested. So just really wanted to provide a really quick overview of some of those resources available on the map for capital projects funds, and encourage you to go take a look and kind of see what these full universe of applications that we've received is. So that's all I really wanted to go over on capital projects funds. I'll stop sharing and send it back to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Colin. I do want to highlight that Carrie has dropped some links in the chat to help you navigate to the map that Colin was sharing, and then also just some more information about capital projects funds and the open grant cycle on the PSC website. So, want to pivot our conversation and spend the rest of our time together discussing our upcoming outreach and engagement work. I plan to review the goals of our engagement activities, our timeline, specifically looking at calendar year 23, how we plan to evaluate those activities, and what you can expect from us next. So just to set some baseline understanding of what it is we're trying to accomplish, our goals for outreach are to establish relationships and respectful rapport between the targeted stakeholder groups and state government, because at the end of the day, relationships are really key to making sure this is effective work. to share information and make sure we're all on the same page. So we're going to provide a uniform-based understanding, specifically with the BEAD program, and for areas where our engagement overlaps with digital equity and Ann's work, also the Digital Equity Act programs as well. To share planning and implementation timelines and ongoing engagement plans. Transparency is a key part of our work, which we'll discuss later, and part of that's just an effort in the spirit of transparency. And then recognizing that engagement is a two-way street, our hope is to gain high-level understanding from stakeholders and clarity on the current state of broadband deployment, what folks are experiencing, and what their priority concerns are, to gain a high-level understanding and clarity on stakeholders' understanding of the state of adoption and affordability, and then also to work with our ISPs to understand their interests and participation in deployment, their priority concerns, and potential participation in broadband deployment programs. And through this, we'll also be establishing feedback mechanisms to capture additional input from stakeholders. Just some notes on timeline. Engagement is an ongoing activity. Engagement's never just one and done, but there are key activities that will be happening, and I have this broken down by quarter throughout the calendar year. So as we're closing here on the end of that first quarter, we've begun our tribal consultations with the 4 federally recognized tribes here in Nebraska. We've had engagement with key contacts, but our stakeholder engagement has not been as complete as it needs to be, which is why we're really focusing in on that as we move into quarter 2. And so we'll be continuing our previous engagement activities. Everything throughout this is additive. Pretty much within each quarter, we're adding something additional. So we'll continue our previous engagement activities and host statewide listening sessions to make sure that we are having as robust engagement with as many folks as possible in order to meet the requirements set forth by us in terms of how our outreach for BEAD is going to be evaluated, and we'll discuss that here in a moment. Moving into quarter 3, once again, continuing our engagement activities, but also focusing on synthesizing the feedback that we've heard from the community, from folks across the state, and sharing that back out with stakeholders, and then just continuing our engagement activity through the end of the year. So last month, when Colin provided an overview of the 5-year plan, he touched on what we'll have to provide information on as it relates to our outreach activities and how the NTIA will evaluate those efforts. There are 5 key questions we'll have to answer. Was there full geographic coverage of Nebraska in our activities? Was there meaningful engagement to diverse stakeholder groups? Were multiple awareness and participation mechanisms used to convey information and to perform our outreach? Were there procedures put in place to ensure transparency? And did outreach and engagement of unserved and underserved communities, including historically underrepresented and marginalized groups, occur? So I'm going to spend some time just addressing how we plan to meet these 5 different requirements so that folks know what that's going to look like. So from a full geographic coverage perspective, these are all of the locations that we plan to have listening sessions in. My hope is that April through June, I won't be in the office very much. You're going to have to catch me on my cell phone because we're going to be traveling across the state, hearing from all of these folks. And then for individuals who are a little bit more visual like me, I do have that represented here. Everywhere there is a blue pin, that is a location for a listening session. Some of these are scheduled already. Some of these are in the process of being scheduled, and I'll discuss listening sessions as we wrap up our discussion about outreach and engagement. As we work through the state, as we meet with folks, as we hear from individuals, our goal is to not just have a listening session in each community that we're visiting. While we're in a community, our hope is to then also hear from small groups, have conversations with folks from agriculture, from small business, from education, from nonprofits serving low-income residents, so that we can hear and engage with as many folks as possible to understand what folks are experiencing and what they would like to see happen in their communities as it relates to broadband deployment and also digital equity, because all of this effort will be done in conjunction with Anne and the work that she's doing from a digital equity perspective. The second question we have to answer is, was there meaningful engagement to diverse stakeholder groups? The NOFO was pretty straightforward about their expectations around what diverse stakeholder groups means. All of these groups that we have listed here were listed explicitly as groups that we need to engage with as we work to understand these issues and concerns throughout the state. So not only will individuals from these groups be explicitly invited to participate in listening sessions, but we also plan to host roundtable discussions with these groups, as well as have dialogue with local entities that fit within these categories as we travel. As you can see, it's a pretty robust list. We need to connect with our local government entities, labor organizations, economic development entities and workforce organizations, minority and women-owned businesses, nonprofit and community-based organizations, community anchor institutions, which in this case are defined as healthcare institutions, K through 12 schools, libraries, higher education and public safety entities, community centers, public housing providers, and owner-operators of public housing entities, internet service providers, unserved and underserved communities, and then historically underrepresented and marginalized groups. We're going to discuss what that definition is here in a moment. The next question we'll have to answer is, were multiple awareness mechanisms used? We've currently been using these webinars as a method to engage with stakeholder groups. We've been updating our website, and we've been using email blasts to engage. We also plan to create some informational literature and collateral to share throughout communities, especially as we're visiting communities and holding listening sessions. And then additionally, those roundtable discussions I've discussed. The next section is whether or not procedures were in place to ensure transparency. Hopefully the answer is yes, and will continue to be yes. Materials produced will be published and made available to the public. We will summarize the feedback we've received and make that available. There will be a public comment process, which we'll have more information on later as we get closer to that. And of course, we'll be able to provide information with the public about how we use their feedback and the impact that that had on the plan. And then the final element that will be evaluated on is whether we have reached unserved and underserved communities, and if we made an intentional effort to engage with historically underrepresented and marginalized groups. Through our travel across the state, we hope to be able to demonstrate our engagement with unserved and underserved communities. Historically underrepresented and marginalized can mean different things to different people. So I would like to make sure that we're working off of a shared definition and using the one that was provided to us by the NTIA as it is presented in the NOFO for the BEAD program. So the term underrepresented communities refers to groups that have been systematically denied a full opportunity to participate in aspects of economic, social, and civic life, including low-income households, aging individuals, incarcerated individuals, veterans, persons of color, Indigenous and Native American persons, members of ethnic and religious minorities, women, LGBTQI+ community persons, persons with disabilities, persons with limited English proficiency, persons who live in rural areas, and persons otherwise adversely affected by persistent poverty or inequality. So I'm going to highlight this definition to make sure that there's a shared understanding that we're using common language to describe what it is that we're doing. And then also just to highlight that all of those groups are in addition to the targeted stakeholder groups that I identified earlier on. So as we're moving throughout the community and as we think through how we're engaging with folks, being able to demonstrate how we've made an intentional effort. And that's really how we're framing this. Have we made an intentional effort in order to reach these groups is going to be really key. So we'll be working with community partners, individuals who serve these folks with these varying identities to make sure that we're connecting and providing as much opportunity for folks to be part of the process as possible. So I think probably what most folks are interested in hearing about is what are we doing next? So most immediately, our upcoming outreach activities are going to be focused on statewide listening sessions. We're planning on visiting about 30 communities across the state, beginning in mid-April through the end of June. As I mentioned, we are actively scheduling those sessions now. We have a handful already on the books, and hopefully those will finish to be scheduling here in the next week or so, and with the opportunity to publish that list so that you can plan to attend one and share the information about these sessions with folks in your network. The goal of these listening sessions, our audience, is anybody who cares about this issue. So the public at large, with a specific emphasis on reaching members from those stakeholder groups that have already been discussed. All of that will be held in conjunction with digital equity. So there's going to be just a lot of crossover and common conversations and shared conversations as it relates to broadband access and deployment, and then what happens next with folks after they've had that access, and how is adoption and device usage and all of those things coming along as well. So within each of those listening sessions, our intent is to provide an overview of the BEAD and Digital Equity Act programs in communities, and provide an overview of local broadband access and maps, and be able to just really share information on the front end, and then give us the opportunity as we reflect back on the goals that we have, which are to provide information and create a shared and common understanding of the issue that we're looking at and the tools and programs we have available to address it, and then also provide an opportunity for us to hear from the community about issues that are important to them. So each listening session will also include breakout discussions. Each breakout group will have specific question prompts for attendees to respond to in order to ensure consistency in the information we are gathering across the state. We will also make use of a feedback form to help capture information from attendees on topics they may not have been able to discuss, or on any information or feedback that they wanted to share that they just didn't get to in conversation. Currently, the breakout discussions that we're focusing on are related to affordability, availability, devices, tech skills and knowledge, privacy, and really anything else that folks might come to mind. As we are scheduling these sessions, our hope is to also have some idea in advance through an RSVP mechanism to know what topics are top of mind for folks coming into those conversations. And really, our goal here is to listen, as is implied in the name listening session, and learn, and have an opportunity to hear from the communities, hear from Nebraska residents about what it is they need, hope, desire, and what a future state of broadband access, affordability, and digital equity and inclusion could look like. Have any questions popped up in the chat?
No.
Okay. Colin, is there anything else you would want to add to those topic areas, or to anything as it relates to outreach?
Just maybe one question I wrote down. Have you envisioned how we're going to distribute the kind of the schedule for all these when we do have them finalized?
Absolutely. So I would encourage folks to keep an eye on the listserv. And once again, if you make sure I'm a safe sender, a safe recipient for you, so my emails don't get filtered to your spam box. We'll also have it using those additional awareness mechanisms. Just keep an eye out for information on our website and different communication methods that we use. But if I'm doing my job right, if we're doing our job right, you'll know about these sessions in advance, and you'll have materials that you can also use to promote within your networks, flyers for distribution, things to that effect. We're going to promote, I promise. Other questions that have popped up?
No, we still don't have any questions.
All right. Colin, I might throw it back to you for closing then.
Perfect. Well, I guess I'll just offer one last opportunity for people to ask questions on anything we've discussed today, or really anything we've discussed in prior months as well. Where it's like Rachel said, it's going to be a busy couple months coming up ahead of us with a lot of these activities, but it's an important part of the process, and it'll be exciting to engage with a lot of the stakeholder groups in Nebraska. So still not seeing any questions, so I think with that we'll just wish everybody a good afternoon and really appreciate people's attendance in the webinar this month. So, all right.